All right, let's get back to space. So let's play a game. And the game is how big and how far away are various objects? Just play along with me. Stop playing on your phone. Stop clicking around. Just like think about this and write down your answer. Okay? Um, just genuinely try to see how good of an idea of space you have in your mind before I show you any of the answers. So the first question is, how big is the moon relative to Earth? If the Earth is, let's say, the size of your fist, how big is the moon? All right, write it down, write your answer down. Do it, or at least think about it. Okay, and just keep this pen and paper handy. I'm gonna be asking you a bunch of these questions. If you guessed roughly the size of your thumb, then sure, I guess I haven't actually done the math. That's about right. Okay, so Earth is a little less than 8,000 miles across. The moon is about a quarter of that. So you'd weigh about a sixth as much on the moon as you do on Earth. All right, fun, fun, fun. How far away is the moon? Hold out a fist and then hold out your thumb and try to move it as far away as you think the moon is. Just try to imagine what sounds right to you. Is it really far away? Like is it really close to it? Like a couple of inches, 3 inches, um, an arm's length, 2 arms length, a football field. Um, if you guessed an arm's length or 2 arms length, you were about right. Ish. It's about 2 arms length away. It's about a quarter of a million miles away. A quarter of a million miles away. It's about 30 Earth diameters away. It's hugely far away. Okay. Now, what about Venus? How big is Venus? Um, just gonna keep playing this game forever. But we'll get back to Venus after this. Okay, let's. So when last we left, the United States had finally started its space program, and they were detonating nuclear weapons all over just because they could. Um, but the Soviet Union was also trying to develop its space program at the same time. So in early 1959, they launched two satellites side by side, Luna and Luna 2, right? Luna 1 and Luna 2. The goal was to see what the moon looked like. Well, actually, at first it was to thwack the moon pretty hard. Luna 1 somehow missed the moon. It it fired out of Earth and it just went beyond the orbit of the moon and it just kept going and eventually got stuck in heliocentric orbit, which means that it started orbiting the sun rather than Earth. The first time humans ever launched something outside Earth's orbit, which is kind of cool. Not at all what they wanted to do, but sure, they did that. Luna 2, they launched a soccer ball of titanium wedges, and they just thwacked the moon. They didn't really have to hit it too precisely because the wedges were emblazoned with CCCP, which is the Russian uh, abbreviation for the Soviet Union. And they have the date, and it's basically just so that when humans arrive on the moon, they'll know that the Russians thwacked it first. They hit it first. Khrushchev throwing the best shade ever, like he did when they were launching rockets. Says, We have no doubt that the excellent scientists, engineers, and workers of the United States of America. This, by the way, I'm just playing an audiobook of him speaking. So this is exactly what he sounds like. We'll also carry their pennant over to the moon. The Soviet pennant, as an old resident, will then welcome your pennant, and they will live there together in peace and friendship. So, great shade. I love this. Luna 3, launched that year as well by the Soviet Union, went around the backside of the moon, which is kind of cool. This required a little bit more engineering. It took a lot more work. They wanted to see the back of the moon for the first time in human history. Now, some of you might realize that the moon is tidally locked to Earth. Now, in astronomy, there are planets that, or there are bodies that orbit each other that both rotate. There are bodies that are tidal, where one of them is tidally locked. That is, it always shows the same face to the other. And then there are some that are dual tidally locked, which means that they both just dance around each other and always show each other the same face. So the moon orbits the Earth every 28.5 days, and it always, always, always faces us. It's locked to facing us. So the Soviets wanted to go to the moon and take some images to show the superiority of communism. And so they did. And they put this camera, this ginormous Polaroid, to try to get images of the dark side of the moon. And 2 years to the day after Sputnik, they managed to get these images of the backside of the moon, the very first images humans had ever seen. I remember reading some Robert Heinlein science fiction that was written in the early 50s, where they went to the backside of the moon and it turned out that there were civilizations there. I was like, huh, that's weird. It's just weird to read these old fictions. It's kind of cool. Kind of ridiculous. Because they didn't realize that they couldn't breathe on the moon, which they should have realized. So this is the backside of the moon, and actually when you compare their images to the images that we've gotten since then, you can see a lot of the major geographic features are represented, right? So they did manage to get a really poor resolution, but they took a picture of the backside of the moon. It's kind of cool. It's a beautiful moon. It used to be made out of Earth stuff. It got thwacked by an asteroid some 4 billion years ago, and Earth split in two. About a quarter of it created what's known as the moon, and the rest created what's known as us, as Earth. It's kind of cool. We didn't realize that until after the Apollo missions, though. Okay. So at this time, the United States has been spying in the Soviet Union for essentially since the Union started. Throughout the 60s, they were launching these U-2 planes, which flew much, much higher than the Soviets could reach. So the U-2 is, you might think about it as the band, but no, the band is named after this. Very, very high flying planes with a single pilot who's tasked to not let the ship be captured, to explode it and, suffer the consequences. This is top secret. The Soviets totally knew that this was happening, right? Like they would tell the United States, cease your incursions into our foreign or into our sovereign space. You entered at this latitude and longitude, and you exited at this latitude and longitude, and went on this exact path. right? Proving that they had the technology to know that they were being observed, but they couldn't shoot down the planes because their rockets just weren't that accurate. But it was a matter of time until they did get to be that accurate. And in May Day 1960, Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union, and Ike Eisenhower had to make a decision whether to admit that a secret spy mission had been shot down over the Soviet Union or deny it. He chose to deny it, thinking that the pilot was going to honor his commitment and blow up the ship. He didn't, because of course he didn't. He wanted to live. But he was captured and sent to the Gulag for a while, and it was a very big national embarrassment. He had thought about not sending out this final mission because we were about a month away from launching the very first ever spy satellite, Grab-1, which would have made the U-2 bombers, or sorry, the U-2 spy planes completely superfluous. But they did, and it was a big, huge international stink during an election year, which did not help the candidate Richard Nixon, who was Ike Eisenhower's vice president, at all. It made them look really bad. There is a catastrophe called the Nedelin catastrophe, which I will post a link to a video talking about it. That killed more than 200 Soviet scientists, officers, and special people. They essentially didn't remove all of the fuel from a rocket between two tests, and it blew up, killing in pretty horrible ways hundreds of people. It's a big, huge mystery, man. It's like one of those. The Soviet Union is famous for its secrecy, and we didn't find out about this for a long time. We still don't know all of the details of it. There's a video I'll just link to. It's a good video. You should check it out. All right, so that happens before 1960 election, in which Dwight Eisenhower could not run. He was term limited based on the new 25th Amendment. And so his vice presidential pick, Richard Milhous Nixon, went up against John Fitzgerald Kennedy with Lyndon Baines Johnson, and Aaron Cabot Lodge Jr. as their vice presidents. Kennedy barely won in the popular vote. He won pretty sizably in the Electoral College vote. Johnson, as the podcast describes, was very, very focused on space for a while. Kennedy and Johnson had both honestly given some pretty cheap shots against the Eisenhower administration, accusing them of having slept on the Soviet Union and not paid attention to their developing space and military powers, which the Eisenhower administration had not, but they couldn't share how they knew all of their information, so they didn't. Nixon lost and said he was going to leave politics forever and you wouldn't have him to kick around anymore. Decent election. Kennedy, first Catholic president, had to give a speech saying that he wasn't going to be subject to the wills of the Pope, that if the Pope instructed him to do something, he would just resign the presidency. Kennedy was taking lots of painkiller medications the entire time, which may have affected a lot of the issues that start bubbling up with the Soviet Union in the next couple of years. All right, back to Venus. So we're going to talk about the various planets and the various missions. Just going to get a bunch of those out of the way so we can go back to the timeline. Venus is our twin planet. It's roughly the same size as Earth. But in this planet, the greenhouse effect has gone off the rails, and it is many hundreds of degrees hotter there. It is excruciating. It's hell. That's because it's closer to the sun, and there's just a much thicker atmosphere. It happens. How far away do you think Venus is? If the moon was relative to Earth, 30 Earth distances, 30 Earth diameters away, how far away do you think Venus is? If you guessed about 25 million miles, you were right. That is how far away Venus is. This is to scale. Things get really, really small in space when you zoom out. In 1961, the Soviet Union launched the very first planetary flyby. They'd shown pictures of the moon, so now they were going to try to do another first and go to another planet. Venera took images of Venus. The United States did that about a year later as well. So the United States was on the process. And in fact, the missions to Venus, there was the Soviet Union was much more interested in going to Venus. They tried many more times than the United States did. All of the ones that are colored red are failures in some form. The Soviet Union tried 29 times and failed more than half the time, or almost half the time, sorry. Other places have gone either around Venus or to Venus. Soviet Union actually crashed some crafts onto the surface of Venus to try to get some topography. We have a couple of seconds of film here. Like the surface of Venus destroyed everything that they sent to it. Just nothing, no technology can withstand this. It's brutal over there. So in 1961, the Soviet Union had another tragedy that the United States was not aware of. This is Valentin Bondarenko, who was doing a isolation study to see how a person could live in a capsule the size of the space capsule for a week, cooking, eating, using the restroom, exercising, doing all of his operations. A couple of days in, he happens to throw some cloth onto the hot the stove, the hot plate. The Soviet Union had pumped the craft full of pure concentrated oxygen, which it turns out is flammable. The United States and the Soviet Union both, their engineers both thought to only add in oxygen because it was easier to do the calculations. The United States suffers a tragedy of their own a couple of years later in the exact same sort of scenario. Only 3 people die for the United States as opposed to this one person. Soviet Union learns their lesson, but they don't share what happened with the United States. The United States doesn't learn this. And then in 1961, in April, Yuri Gagarin is strapped to this rocket. He has no controls. He has no control whatsoever because it would have been too much to give him any sort of possibility of affecting the trajectory. They strap him to the rocket, send him around the planet, and then catch him. Becomes the most famous person in the 20th century, or at least one of the most famous people. Not a big deal in the United States because we tried very hard to downplay his accomplishments, the Soviet Union's accomplishments. But yeah. So if you watch, well, any number of movies, but in particular Hidden Figures, this is a fascinating thing to pay attention to. So, okay. This is Yuri Gagarin. He makes the cover of Time magazine, and oh, there was a guy behind him whose face is now just like a bunch of smoke. That's weird. Oh no, he's not there at all. Oh, cropped out entirely. Doesn't exist. Just Yuri Gagarin. I love the erased photographs. It's one of my favorite subplots of this class. Okay. So in 1961, the United States arms some people to try to invade Cuba, to try to overthrow the communist regime there. It does not end well. And then the United States manages to launch the first person into space. So several pretty, the Soviet Union's failures are hidden, right? Like they hid the Nadilin catastrophe. They hid Bodarenko's death. If Yuri Gagarin had died, they would have hidden that too. But the Americans' failures are made very, very, very public very quickly. So when Alan Shepard is set to go up in Freedom 7, the Mercury, the third, well, the first manned Mercury mission, the United States needs this. They did not think that they were going to get beat by the Soviet Union, but not only were they were beat pretty badly, right? Like Alan Shepard goes up into space and then immediately back down. He does not orbit Earth. Again, Hidden Figures, First Man, First Astronaut Wives Club, a lot of these, The Right Stuff, all of these movies go into some detail. You should check those out. Alan Shepard, by all accounts, is an asshole. Definitely like a philandering person, but well, you'll have that. He goes up into space, comes down, becomes world famous. Mercury 7 are the biggest celebrities in the United States throughout most of this time period. And then in 1961, John F. Kennedy, tired of being made a fool by the Bay of Pigs invasion, by the being beaten to orbit, and convinced by LBJ to try to set a good target far enough into the future that they can actually hit it. Goes around the country making this case that the United States should choose to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. I'll put a link to that video as well. And he manages to get Congress to pass a pretty robust budget, raising some taxes to get Americans to go to space, to fund missions to the moon. So the Mercury 7 we've already talked about. Carpenter, Cooper, Glenn, Grissom, Schirra, Shepard, and Clayton. Grissom has a tragic end. Carpenter leaves pretty early on. John Glenn is the oldest at the time, and he manages to live a full life. He died in 2015. Was a U.S. senator. Yeah. Mom will certainly talked about this. Okay. There was a new class after Mercury because we needed more people for the Gemini program. There were going to be 2 people in Gemini, 3 people in Apollo. Gemini and Apollo are launched at the exact same time. Gemini is to try to work out some of the maneuvers and technologies that we're going to need to go to the moon. And Apollo's actually going to be what gets us to the moon, why it's named Apollo. So C has a tragic end, which really affects Neil Armstrong. And you can see that in the movie First Man. A couple of these other people, White has a tragic end. Lovell has a eventful career. Jim Lovell. Anyway, so that's class number 2. The 14 in class number 3. That one has Buzz Aldrin in it, and Gene Cernan is the final person on the moon. He's a geologist. Mike Collins, he is the loneliest man in the world or in the universe. He's the first person to see the dark side of the moon. Bunch of other famous people. Chaffee also has a tragic end, sadly. The Scientists, a small class. These were just more dudes doing dude stuff. The original 19, that's a joke. Get it? Haha, joke. They're not very original at all. A couple of them were on Apollo 13. Anyway, is that original 19? Okay. So the Gemini and the Apollo missions, they start concurrently, but Gemini's missions are all launched first, 65, 6, and 66. Apollo's missions, there's an initial mission in 1967 that ends tragically, which completely stops the program. And then about a year and change later, it starts over again until we get to the moon. And then we go to the moon a bunch of times, having a near miss on Apollo 13. And then the program is canceled after Apollo 17. We're supposed to go back a couple more times, but we didn't because Nixon was president and the American public didn't care anymore. So Gemini managed to do a lot of famous firsts, right? Space maneuvers, manual landings, spacewalks. That means going outside into space with nothing but your own suit to protect you. Endurance tests, docking with first like a fake, like a certain spot in space, and then an actual other vehicle. Double rendezvous, determining that radiation is not an issue to worry about. Like people aren't going to get all of the cancers just by being in space. Orbital records, extravehicular activity records. Yeah, so we'll get to all of these. Spend a little more time on these. But so John F. Kennedy issues the call on in May 25th of 1961. Well, all of May, really. The Gagarin had gone up into orbit a year before. John Glenn finally is able to go in orbit in the Mercury Atlas 6, the French 7 rocket that goes in orbit. Super famous after this, really, really well known. John Glenn, unlike Alan Shepard, was a generally acknowledged to be a very good guy. His wife had a stutter. She was a wonderful person. They were considered the ma and pa of the Mercury 7. They were I don't know. There's a couple of stories of him being a sexist. And so when I say that he was, by all accounts, a good guy, I think, well, let's just say everybody else was worse. So the Soviet Union manages at this time to launch their own spy satellites. So now space has become a new theater. Eisenhower very much did not want to militarize space, but he very much did want the possibility of spying from space. So this was good for him. Well, not that the Soviets had spy satellites and Eisenhower wasn't president anymore, but now this is what space is. All right, and then finally, we're going to just stop here and then move forward. The Soviets launched the first woman into space. They were very much into trying to beat us in all of these major milestones. So we'll go back to Soviet milestones about extravehicular work, exchanging entire crews in space. We'll do all of that in the next video, but for now, let's just wrap this up and see you next week.